Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everybody, and thank you for taking the time this afternoon to come and join with us. I'm Denise Cosgrove, I'm the Chief Executive of Presbyterian Support Northern, and I'm really delighted to be able to bring you yet another in our series of lectures which we've been holding over the last, over this year. And they've been around the theme of improving child wellbeing, but we've had a range of speakers, fascinating speakers, and I feel like we've learnt so much ourselves as an organisation, let alone what we've been able to share with you and with others. I feel really, really honoured to welcome Anne Jacobs, who's our speaker from New York. And I've had the chance over the last couple of days to get to know Anne and observe and listen to her. And I have to say that you are incredibly humble but impressive, and your insights are amazing. So today we're going to get the opportunity to learn and get some lessons and observations from New York. And you might throw in a few about that you've made about New Zealand as well, and particularly around the area of incarcerated women and their children. And we have particularly looked at that because of the impact of that on child wellbeing. So Anne, welcome.
Good afternoon. Is this mic okay? Okay, good. I won't mess with it then. I'm so pleased to have been invited to be with you today. And I'm especially grateful to Denise Cosgrove, John Dixon, and Presbyterian Support Northern for including me in this important lecture series on improving the well-being of children. In fact, in New Zealand, as in the United States, there's a large and growing number of children who are affected by parental incarceration, and it's very important that they not be invisible or forgotten. I'm going to be speaking to you today from my experience of 45 years of working in the justice system in the United States. During that time, I've had the opportunity to work in the jails, our remand facilities, in prisons, in halfway houses, and in the community for government and for not-for-profits, and at the city, state, and national levels. For 17 years, I was the director of the Women's Prison Association and Home, which was founded in 1844 by Quakers who saw a need to pay attention as the public to what was happening in our prisons, and specifically to look at what was happening to women. Each year at the Women's Prison Association, or WPA if I fall into using the initials, we were serving about 2,500 women and their families in the jail, in 2 prisons, and in 3 offices in the community, which included 2 residential facilities. I then had a practice retirement to Costa Rica. And I came back to New York in 2011 to head up the Prisoner Reentry Institute at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Thus, that is the background for the slide. John Jay is a senior college within the City University of New York. And at PRI, another initial, the Prisoner Reentry Institute, the place I work, we're very interested in learning what it takes for people who've been involved in the justice system to live successfully in the community. And to contribute to, and then our work is, in addition to some direct service that we do, to contribute to the training of professionals and the development of systems that are more effective in working with them. So our work includes both practice and policy, and seeks to capitalize on the fact that we're within the largest urban university system in the country. So a major part of our work at PRI is expanding, I'm trying to use your terms, so I may misuse them, but is expanding access to tertiary education. That would be higher education in the United States. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And to expand it for justice-involved people, both while they're incarcerated and after they're released. I note this because for the years that I was focused on dealing with people in the justice system and the crises that they present around housing and jobs and family reunification, I wasn't paying very much attention to education. And it really is the kind of least attended to component of work with justice-involved populations in the United States, and yet it's the one that we know is most reliably transformational. It really does change the trajectory of people's lives and create avenues for success. So I've been asked to share with you lessons from New York. And I want to be clear, most of what I've got to share is a cautionary tale. One that holds lessons that I hope will be of use to you, perhaps confirming things you already know, and perhaps provoking some thought about some directions that you want to go in. To that end, I want to start by briefly discussing the U.S. experience of the dramatic growth in our criminal justice system, and particularly our incarcerated population, and the huge impact that's had on women and children. Then I'll explain why a conversation about women in the criminal justice system makes it obvious that we have to be focused on more than criminal justice policy. The paths into and out of prison have many dimensions: poverty, unemployment, family violence, substance abuse, mental health, homelessness, child welfare. To address those issues that show up in incarceration requires an intersectional and intergenerational approach. To that point, I'm going to share a little bit about some of the work that we have done in New York, and a framework that I developed to help me hold the complexity of all of the challenges that face us when we're working on behalf of justice-involved people, and particularly women and children. So let me start the cautionary tale by showing you. This is not only the cover of a book, it is the graph of the increase in incarceration in the United States. Although the United States represents 5% of the world's population, we have 1/4 of all of the inmates in the world. The United States' use of incarceration has always raised issues, notably its use to perpetuate racism and to promote the narrow economic issues or interests of a few. However, in the last 40 years, we saw a staggering 500% increase in the number of people who are locked up. The U.S. currently locks up 2.2 million people, a higher percentage of our population than any other country on the planet. The second and third place countries are Rwanda and Russia. We lock people up at 3 times the rate that you do. Additionally, in the United States, there are another 6.7 million people under community supervision, probation and parole supervision, and 11 million people cycling through our jails, our remand facilities. Those systems are separate in the United States. This system costs the United States $80 billion a year. Women have been the fastest growing segment of that population, now reaching almost 10% of those in prison. In comparison, the total New Zealand incarceration is just over 10,000, 7.6% of them women. However, in the last decade, the women's population in New Zealand, the women's prison population in New Zealand has increased by more than 70%. The increase has been more rapid since 2015, resulting in the need to reopen closed prison facilities and increase capacity in existing facilities. The number of women being managed on community-based sentences has also more than doubled since 2004. That's New Zealand. So both the United States and New Zealand have experienced a dramatic increase in reliance on incarceration. As I talk about the U.S. experience, I invite you to consider whether there are parallels between the U.S. and what's currently happening in New Zealand. I encourage you to learn from us, because there is widespread and growing agreement in the United States that we got it wrong, very, very wrong. Let me talk about some of the ways this shows up for us. To quote the Sentencing Project, mass incarceration has not hit all communities equally. People of color constitute 37% of the U.S. population, but 67% of our prison population. There are racial disparities throughout the criminal justice process. African Americans are more likely than white Americans to be arrested, once arrested to be convicted, and once convicted to do longer sentences than non-black colleagues. Not exactly the right place for this. We'll go back to this. This is my weak spot. You know, in the next decade of my professional development, I will really learn how to use PowerPoint. What is less well understood, and this is a really important point, is why the increase in incarceration happened. To answer the question, the National Academy of Sciences did a scientific analysis of the growth of incarceration by a commission that was headed by then John Jay College President Jeremy Travis, who had a national reputation as a researcher, a scholar, and a practitioner, and Bruce Western. Some of you may know Bruce's work. I believe he's Australian. We now have him in Columbia in the United States. And what they found using a rigorous methodology was that the increase in incarceration was not because there'd been an increase in crime. In fact, crime had been going down. And the reason that more people of color were locked up for drug offenses was not because they use or sell drugs at a greater rate than white people. Rather, the increase was a function of policy decisions that expanded the locus and focus of criminal justice system and eliminated the use of discretion. In other words, it wasn't that crime went up or got worse, it was that we decided to be tough on crime. We heavily policed poor communities of color. We declared a war on drugs. We imposed more severe sentences on crack cocaine than on powdered cocaine, which, there was a difference in which communities were using them. We implemented longer mandatory sentences such that the judges no longer had much discretion in sentencing. And we cut down on temporary release and parole mechanisms that allowed early release even for people who had turned their lives around. In short, we sent more people to prison, kept them in prison longer, and started imposing life sentences and life without parole to an unprecedented extent. And then we have community supervision. In the United States, 4.5 million people, or 1 in 55 Americans, are on parole or probation, otherwise known as community supervision. That's twice the number of people in jails and prisons. Community supervision is intended in part to provide an alternative to incarceration, when in fact it's evolved into one of the biggest drivers of incarceration. In 2016, nearly 350,000 people were admitted to jail or prison because they violated, technical violations, the terms of their probation or parole, most often for things like missing appointments, failing to pay fines, or testing positive for drugs. Without oversight, community supervision can deepen inequities by further entrenching poverty through steep fines, widening racial disparities, offering inadequate support for people with mental health and substance abuse treatment needs, such that it becomes virtually certain they're going to fail. We know that reducing supervision can be accomplished alongside gains in community safety because from 2007 to 2016, 37 states reduced community supervision populations and saw a drop in crime. Kind of counterlogical, but really important information. We also used language that demonizes lawbreakers and stoke public fear. We'd always used dehumanizing language that nominalized people as convicts, as felons, as criminals, as offenders. Offenders isn't a neutral word, is it? Now we escalated to terms like super predators, career criminals, and we talked in terms of having an epidemic of crack babies that were somehow going to wreak havoc on our civilization. I have to say that it's only been recently that those of us working in this field have learned how transformational it is to create the discipline of using people-first language. It changes the speaker, the listener, and the object of the conversation by putting dignity back into the equation when we put the person back into how we talk about them. So rather than the homeless, it's the person who's experiencing homelessness. Or rather than the mentally ill, it's the person who's struggling with mental illness. Or rather than the prisoner, it's the person who's currently incarcerated. To quote Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative, ultimately our humanity depends on everybody's humanity. I've come to understand and to believe that each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. I believe that for every person on the planet, I think if somebody tells a lie, they're not just a liar. If somebody takes something that doesn't belong to them, they're not just a thief. And even if you kill somebody, you're not just a killer. And because of that, there's this basic human dignity that must be respected by law. Both as an expression of punitiveness to be harder on crime, and as a function of the reality of what it took for correctional administrators to keep up with the increased number of people coming into their facilities and the associated medical and security costs. Programs in prisons were gutted during this period of getting tough on crime. Our prisons became more like warehouses with long periods of idleness, increasing violence, and over-reliance on solitary confinement. This was exacerbated by the movement to deinstitutionalize the mentally ill that was not accompanied by an investment in community mental health centers in the United States. So now, the mental hospitals are our jails and prisons. And then to put a cherry on the top, U.S. lawmakers, pandering for public support by looking tough on crime, created literally thousands of collateral consequences of criminal conviction. This means civil penalties that just automatically are imposed because you've had this conviction. It can mean you can't vote, in some places can't get a driver's license, in some places can't get a barber's license. Not because there's any data that establishes a connection between the person and the risk, a risk, but because of an insatiable appetite to punish and an assumption that it would garner public support for elected officials. And then we added on a lot of financial penalties, including fees to participate in mandated community service programs, get the drug tests that you have to get, paid child support that accumulated while you were locked up and unable to make a living. And these cumulatively virtually assure that a person will never be out of debt. Every aspect of the process is punitive, and with the stigma of a record and the reality of collateral consequences, every conviction becomes a life sentence. I could go on about the ways in which our U.S. administration of justice does not work for people without standing and means, but I think I've made my point. As a result, it's really unlikely that people going through the system in the United States experience it as just, fair, legitimate, despite research that does establish that the perception of legitimacy has more bearing on compliance with laws than deterrence does, than fear of being caught. The swiftness, the certainty, and the proportionality of our responses to law breaking are more useful to us in the behavior we're trying to produce. And while each of these issues needs reform, I think that the dysfunction is actually inevitable because in the United States there is a real lack of agreement and alignment on what the purpose is of sentencing and corrections. You know, there are generally 5 different theories of sanctioning. The purpose of sanctioning. It's deterrence, it's incapacitation, it's retribution or punishment, or rehabilitation or restoration. There is no agreement. You know, you can go to a meeting at the Bar Association and you will not be able to get agreement among the actors in the very same court about what they're trying to accomplish there, or even how they would prioritize it. They want it all. And as a result, all we end up with is punishment. So having, I hope, made you properly skeptical of adopting U.S. criminal justice practice, let's talk about the children of incarcerated parents. Yes. It's estimated to be 23,000 children on any one day in New Zealand who have a parent in prison. It's important to recognize, however, that you're really talking about a much larger and growing number, because having a parent go to prison is a life-altering experience, and the child lives with that legacy for the rest of their life. So what happens when we don't pay enough attention to the child's experience of parental incarceration? The research tells us that children who experience a parent's arrest and are subsequently separated from them suffer a wide array of psychological problems, including trauma, anxiety, guilt, shame, and fear. They feel abandoned, confused, powerless, betrayed, distraught. These problems frequently manifest themselves in poor academic achievement, truancy, dropping out of school, gang involvement, early pregnancy, self-harm, drug abuse, and delinquency. In the U.S., 1 in 10 of these children will have been incarcerated before they reach adulthood. I want to say, but won't spend much time on it, that it's also incredibly important to think about caregivers. They're really the invisible party here. Often it's the children's grandmother or aunt or sister. They take on the additional responsibility of caring for these children. What is their experience? They care for the children, try to make up for the mother's absence, and often keep the mother and child in touch with each other. There's the agony and uncertainty that they experience, magnified in the child's experience of not knowing what the likely outcome is going to be of the case, or when it will get resolved, or when mom will come home. After months and months, when there is a disposition in the case and sentencing, women are often sent away. And I'm talking about the U.S. experience, and you have to try on whether it actually fits for New Zealand or not. But women will be sent very far away from their home communities, making it very challenging to go visit mom. Very challenging and expensive, particularly for these caretakers who are caring for other children or other family members. And they do all of this without much support. So what should we make of all of this? Well, to the extent that we continue doing what we do, let's do it in a way that's child sensitive. From arrest through remand and adjudication of the case to sentencing, incarceration, and reintegration. We can do those things that we otherwise do, but in a more child-sensitive kind of way. Let's imagine for a minute what the world looks like from the child's experience. Was the mother arrested in front of the child? Was it a chaotic, loud, scary situation? Was she handcuffed in front of the child? What happens to the child when the mom's taken away? Are they also taken away by child welfare? Often mothers don't get much of a chance to plan for a responsible handoff to a family member. If the arrest occurs someplace else, how do the children find out about it? When they come home and nobody's there? When the case is pending, what is the child being told to help understand what's happening, particularly about a process in which it can be so difficult for anyone to know what the outcome is likely to be? Does the child get to see his or her mother while she's incarcerated? People are often, I said this before, they're often incarcerated far from home and in areas not well served by public transportation. They also encounter a view that some people, often correctional administrators, have held in the States, that jails and prisons aren't a good place for kids, so we're going to discourage visits. However, we've found that it's really important that people have that children have the opportunity to be in touch with their mother as soon after the arrest as possible. They worry about their mom. Sometimes they feel guilty, like if they were the one who answered the door when a warrant was being served, they feel like they did it to her. For kids who know what they know about jails from watching cartoons, they think of them as dungeons with people kind of, like chained to the brick wall. So it's really important that they get to see and hear from their mom. If they are lucky enough to visit, under what conditions? Children are searched when they go into a facility to determine whether they're carrying contraband. There's a question in every facility about whether children get to sit on their mom's lap. Is there a comfortable seating area? In the women's facility that I saw here, the visiting area has 5 things bolted to the floor. You know, a little round table and 4 permanent kinds of seats that are kind of like adult level. In the U.S., the visiting areas that are more child sensitive actually include like play areas where a parent can go off and sit on the floor and play with toys in a more relaxed kind of age appropriate kind of way. And I may have heard this this is the way it's done someplace here. You know, in an even better version of that is when there are volunteers there who can take a portion of the visit to take the child off to play, so mom and the visitor, the 2 adults, get a chance to actually have an adult conversation. So these and other things to be concerned about are really nicely laid out in this publication produced by Pillars, an organization that some of you may be familiar with that particularly is focused on providing mentors to children during parental incarceration. But this report also talks in the way that I was just describing the kind of process of criminal justice and what it would mean to be more child kind of sensitive. The report also includes the Children's of Incarcerated Parents Bill of Rights, which was developed in 2005 by the San Francisco Partnership for Children of Incarcerated Parents in conjunction with youth who had incarcerated parents. And it really is a roadmap for reform when we're concerned with safeguarding children whose parents are involved in the criminal justice system. Now, I don't expect you to be able to read this, so I will read it to you really quickly. This is the Bill of Rights. I have the right to be kept safe and informed at the time of my parents' arrest. I have the right to be heard when decisions are being made about me. I have the right to be considered when decisions are made about my parents. I have the right to be well cared for in my parents' absence. I have a right to speak with, see, and touch my parent. I have the right to support as I struggle with my parents' incarceration. I have the right not to be judged, blamed, or labeled because of my parents' incarceration. And I have the right to a lifelong relationship with my parent. Those are the voices of directly affected people, and I think sharing a lot of wisdom with us and providing a really good frame of reference for us, no matter which part of the criminal justice system we're looking at making more child aware and sensitive. In addition to that, let's see whether we can do some things differently to produce some better results for everyone, not just make the best of the situation in which they found themselves. The literature really is replete with the problems in relying on out-of-home placement for children. And child welfare experts often conclude that children are going to be best taken care of by their own families, particularly if those families can be supported in being highly functioning. So we should be looking for opportunities to address the needs of the family and of the children in the environments that they naturally find themselves, like schools. Which is why I think PSN's particular interest in this, given your placement in the schools, is so amazingly powerful and ripe with like lots of possibilities. And then the other thing is to be focused on equipping a mother in the criminal justice system to live successfully in the community and care for her children. But this is a challenge that's way beyond what the correction system can do. It's a shared responsibility. In the US, women who come to the attention of the criminal justice system are overwhelmingly poor, undereducated, unemployed or underemployed, homeless or living in substandard housing, involved in abusive or violent relationships, and they are mothers. Overwhelmingly mothers, and of 2.4 children if you're doing the data analysis. In fact, their lifelong exposure to violence is breathtaking. They often started witnessing and experiencing violence as children and it continued into their adulthood. They have untreated trauma, associated substance abuse, and high rates of mental illness. So I don't tweet, and I don't read tweets very often, but this one particularly captured my attention. It's from James Docherty of Community Justice Scotland, and he says, "Our society has an emotional mental health problem disguised as a drug problem, and a poverty problem disguised as a crime problem." I think he's right. These are problems that people had before they went to prison and are likely to have after they're incarcerated. The literature will tell us that some of these factors are criminogenic. They produce, future criminal behavior, and others are not. And it'll encourage us to focus on the ones that are criminogenic. But I think that they're all salient to being able to live a healthy life for oneself and to build a healthy life for your children. So the elements of constructing a life are the same, whether the goal is to reduce recidivism, increased assistance, reduce substance abuse, reduce homelessness or unemployment or poverty, or increase child welfare and well-being. I want to share a tool that I created when I was trying to explain to my colleagues who were hotly debating whether they should put their resources in housing or their resources in employment, that in fact, like you and I, we need it all, and so do the people that we're trying to serve, right? Everybody has to have a theory under which they have money in their pocket, can feed themselves, put on clothes, and get across town if they have to go to an appointment, safe place to live. They have family aspirations. They have chronic health problems to a disproportionate degree, maybe struggling with mental health and addiction issues. The criminal justice system is very likely to want a piece of them, that they have to report for parole. And they're part of larger social kinds of communities. So, in fact, the other thing that I realized in trying to lay this out is that we think about the work in two short segments, right? It's as if you just handled the 30 days after release, things are going to go fine. But in fact, there are stages of people getting their lives together. And for people who've been incarcerated or people who are in crisis, you're frequently just dealing with survival. They need a roof over their head that night. They need food in their stomach that day. And your goal when they're in that situation is stabilization. I used to have to explain to my board why getting somebody on public assistance was a good result. It was because it wasn't where I wanted them to end up for the rest of their life. It was a way of stabilizing their life in the shorter run while we worked in the longer process toward increasing degrees of self-sufficiency. And any of us in the room who've raised young adults, we see that it's a work in progress that can sometimes take a very long time, right? So I put all of this together, and I do not expect you to see this, but the various areas of life are across the top, the domains of life, and the different phases are down the side, showing what you might be looking for, as the solution in those different arenas. I've used this as a way of doing an assessment of somebody because some things are going to be more in place than others, and it helps you decide, kind of how to prioritize things. But you need to always do it with the goal in mind. The goal is for people to have adequate money for food, clothing, transportation, and personal and family expenses, to be able to live in a clean, safe, affordable home that accommodates the household appropriately. For women, it's almost always reunifying with children and reconciliation with other family members. It's physical and mental health, and doing it in a preventive kind of way, not just showing up in the emergency room. And of course, we want people who are law-abiding and living in the community without community supervision. And we want people who are engaged in what in the literature is called pro-social, but what you and I know of as, healthy social networks of people that are supportive of us, where we have some access to some of their social capital if we're looking for a job or need a babysitter. And then I think that the thing that has come home for me so strongly in all of the work that I've done with justice-involved men and women is it seems to be a really basic interest that we have to be able to do for other people, to give back, to make a contribution, to have our lives matter. And I'm a strong advocate of creating, very consciously creating those, or allowing, you don't even have to create them, people will find them in prison if they're allowed to, and in the community. And it's a very powerful part of the process. So, in fact, if we were addressing these basic human needs, the vast majority of people in prison could be safely kept in the community. We wouldn't have to lock them up at all. We do make extensive use of alternatives to incarceration in New York City. Some are very short-term, referring somebody for an afternoon of a workshop or something like that, just so we don't have to send them to jail for some minor violation, but where the system wants there to be a consequence. I'm sorry. And for other people, it's a more extensive program of participation in drug treatment or counseling or things that occur over a longer period of time. But keeping them in the community makes a lot of sense to me. Like, why take somebody out of a home that they've got to put them in jail to try to help them get a home when they get back? Why take the children away when you could provide, some additional kind of observation and support while mom may not be in the best shape to take care of them, but avoid the trauma and the disruption of taking them away. That's the premise of a program that the Women's Prison Association runs called Justice Home, which operates as an intensive, gender-responsive alternative to incarceration for women facing incarceration of at least 6 months and more often of up to 4 years. The Justice Home concept is based on the notion that clients' daily lives within their own communities offer countless opportunities to practice and refine new skills, while also preventing the disruption of, a living situation and a family being together. So the Justice Homes project occurs both in the women's home, where staff go to, I think what Minister Davis said, walk alongside. That's what, I got to meet him yesterday, and I was very moved by that phrase. It will be maybe one of the biggest gifts I take back to the United States with me. But that's what, staff does. They walk alongside the women. They help them come up with a budget, and do the grocery shopping, and, figure out how to deal with all of the really competing demands of living in the community that prison not only does not prepare you for, it prepares you to be terrible at that. And at least in my experience, the thing that terrified our clients the most was having to go to a parent-teacher conference. Their experience in school was so bad, and they feel so vulnerable and exposed and inadequate that the last thing in the world they wanted to do was walk in. The last thing that they felt like they had the skills to do was engage in a conversation with the school about their child. But accompanied by somebody who's both helped them prepare, helps them debrief, and is walking alongside them, they learned that, in fact, they were pretty good at it. So the point is that the kind of supports that women need most often lay outside of the justice system. And it requires a commitment from government to recognize that justice-involved people are already part of the responsibility of all of these other public systems. They just may be kind of invisible there or unwittingly excluded from being able to take full advantage of the services and supports that other governmental agencies are providing to them. So at WPA, I learned that a large part of our responsibility was bridging the gaps between these systems. It was like kind of like helping. I had to learn what child welfare concerns were and what jailers' concerns were, and then try to bridge a conversation between them so that you could start. The warden of the jail had no idea that mothers were under pressure to plan for permanency of their kids within a year or they were going to lose parental custody. And yet they were making it really hard for mothers to have visits. And child welfare workers did not want to go to the jail to take the kid to visit because they felt criminalized having to go through the screening. So we ended up doing a needs assessment and a lot of cross-training that is captured in a publication that we did for the Annie E. Casey Foundation. It's old, but for those of you who are interested in what that kind of cross-system work might look at, I would encourage you to look at it. All of the things that I've showed you today are online. So, a multifaceted strategy to improve the well-being of children affected by parental incarceration will include attention to each decision point in the criminal justice process: the arrest, the remand, the sentencing, the incarceration, the release. And it will pay attention to how you can increase or improve the functioning of the woman and the family and the child in the community. For instance, we could create alternatives to arrest for women suffering from substance misuse or mental illness, improve the options available for women. At the same time, if we are going to arrest women, we can do child-sensitive arrest policies. We can create a range of alternatives to remand, to prosecution, to incarceration, and at the same time, make better provisions for keeping children with an incarcerated parent informed on what's happening and caregivers being supported in taking care of kids while the mom is away. More robust programs in prison that start at day one and prepare a woman for release, and long-term supports in the community, and better provisions and conditions for children visiting the prison to see their mom. I could go on and on. There are lots of things that you can do, some of which have costs associated with them, some not so much. But to pull all this off requires a cross-systems commitment and a willingness to change practice to include and effectively serve justice-involved families. There are many. I've had the most incredible week here of visiting the prisons, a couple of prisons, and talking to both staff of PSN and other NGOs. And you've got very thoughtful people here who are doing amazing work, and the building blocks of this are there. It just needs to be built out and woven together, and you could. What you could produce would be absolutely amazing. I want to just, I'm summing up, I promise. I was afraid that I'd go on too long. I hope I haven't. To meet the complex needs of women leaving prison who are homeless and who sought to reunify with their kids, I want to describe one more thing we did just to set the context for something I want to show you. So in New York, we have a lot of women who are homeless and who wanted to reunify with their kids. But the way the homelessness system operated, you're either a single or you're a family. And they're paid for differently. The state pays a higher percentage of one than the other. Federal money goes into one and not the other. You know, they're separate kinds of systems. And then you have a family court that's overseeing the foster care placement of the child and who's deeply skeptical about the mom to begin with, and particularly, you know, about a mom who's homeless. So we were lucky enough to get control over a 28-unit apartment building and to get the money to rehab it. But then we had to figure out how to make it work. And it was literally like banging your head, you know, on these bureaucratic walls, except that we were able to get some people to see that a slight variation in how they did things would produce a miraculous result. So we brought women in on the singles billing sheet. The apartments were 2-bedroom apartments with a living room, kitchen kind of area. They were the same apartments. They were just paid for by different funding streams. And women would be able to come to us and live as roommates and start the process of like living more independently in the community, but also going to family court and beginning to make the case for reunification with their children. The family court was initially skeptical about, letting somebody come to a homeless facility until we took them on tours and showed them what a great environment it was. And then when, women would start having weekend visitation where the kids could stay over. And then when there really was reunification, the kids would move in and we would move the mom over to the voucher that said we're asking the family system to pay. We had on-site childcare. We had case management that both knew the schools and the kinds of supports and enrichment that the kids needed, as well as the moms. And it was a safe place where the women could stay for about a year while they were getting their feet underneath them and learning what it meant to parent again. After a separation, it wasn't the same as it was before. The kids are both older, and what they've done with the experience sometimes makes it very challenging for parents to pick up that responsibility again. But it was also very healing for the kids, because it was a place where they could deal honestly with the fact that they had this shame, or this anger, or this whatever they had made of the loss of their mom. And so we had a collaboration with Manhattan Neighborhood Network, which was a cable television, local regional cable television thing. And someone came in and the kids made videos of their experience of living in Huntington House and reunifying with their moms. And it was a place of healing and community. So this was the outside of Huntington House. And on the left is Cheryl with her daughter when they were first reunified, after Cheryl had been in for, I actually didn't go back and look up her stories. We don't pay that much attention to people's stories. We just knew that she had a substance abuse problem and she really wanted her daughter back. And then this was the report that we did on the first 10 years of Huntington House, and this was her with her daughter 10 years later. And then I went on Facebook as I was preparing for this. And this is Cheryl and her daughter now. So, let me sum up. Don't do what the US did. Resist easy knee-jerk reactions to crime, substance abuse, and poverty. And recognize that the true victims of an insatiable appetite to punish are the children and families we want to serve, and all of us who lose the contribution that they've got to make as we are wasting resources on doing things that are harmful. Embrace the possibilities that you have in New Zealand. At the August 2018 Justice Summit, the government announced its commitment to create a safe and effective justice system, reducing prison numbers by 30% in the next 15 years, and improving the well-being of people in their care, their whānau, yeah. I wish I were going back with more language skills than I came with, and their wider communities. And recognize that this job can't be done by corrections alone. Virtually everyone has a piece of this responsibility. Instead, focus on the opportunity to transform people's lives through a partnership among the criminal justice system, other public agencies charged with aspects of social responsibility, and the NGOs and general public, that you can enroll into knowing who we're locking up in a different kind of way than they think about it right now. And consistent with this commitment, I encourage you to try, starting today, to use Personfirst language. catch ourselves and catch each other when we fall into the shorthand of the homeless or of offenders or prisoners. It takes a muscle, and it takes a long time, kind of like reentry does. But it's really worthwhile because it's a way of manifesting our personal commitment to restoring the humanity of us all. And finally, thank you again for having me, and thanks to Presbyterian Support Northern for your visionary leadership in inviting all of us to this ongoing conversation about improving the well-being of children. I would welcome any of you contacting me if you want links to the reports that I was talking about, or if there's any other way that I can be helpful.
And at the beginning of the talk, you acknowledged that while education is a really important factor in this journey to get people to make better choices, but it's not recognised as such. Even yourself acknowledged that. Why do you think in this criminal justice sector we have an issue with linking education factors into it?
So I'm a little self-conscious about talking about education in New Zealand because there are so many differences in how you conceive of this. When I visited the prisons, there was a lot of discussion about numeracy and literacy. I heard that about half the population is really struggling at very low levels of functionality in that kind of regard. And I saw some amazing vocational programs. And I learned about these levels. And all of that, first of all, our vocational programs in the States are generally very outdated and not relevant to the current employment market at all. And we certainly don't have levels like all of that. So I'm trying to, go back and forth. And all I can tell you is from the United States point of view, we had college in virtually all the prisons in the college would be your tertiary institutions, or university. We had it in a lot of prisons in the United States and virtually all the prisons in New York, the state that I'm from, until we got tough on crime and eliminated eligibility for financial aid. So incarcerated people were no longer eligible to get Pell Grants, which was how the colleges were affording to deliver these services inside. So, the last 25 years, college pretty much died. And then there was like a resurgence. It was interesting that some colleges found other ways of going in, usually through foundation funding or a lot of volunteered teaching and instruction and all of that. And we're seeing a resurgence of it now. So I'm responsible for running a college and prison program and for providing supportive services to allow people after they've been incarcerated to enroll in the city university. Like, we're working with 300 people at any one time who are in various stages of enrolling or going to school. We've had 300 degrees granted to our students. A third of them are second and third academic degrees. You can get a 2-year degree and then a 4-year degree and then like a graduate degree, and some of our students do that. And it's just incredibly transformational to recognize that there's intellect and curiosity behind bars, that people learn about themselves and the broader world in a way that they never thought about before they went in. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that I think it's a little difficult to translate back and forth, but I would just encourage you not to dismiss anything out of hand. I think that people from the day that they hit a prison door need to be active and encouraged and supported in seeing opportunity for themselves, having hope, seeing an avenue to have a different life, which often means making a living, making a difference in people's lives. School can be very important to that. The other observation that I had, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I think that prisons in the United States, not in every state, we don't have like a national, we have like 50 different states, and they're very different. So I'll speak about prisons in New York. They're much more permeable than my experience was of New Zealand prisons. I was hosted in a very gracious way, and the prisons were beautiful and beautifully landscaped and very thoughtfully staffed in a way, even if understaffed. You had more program staff roles defined than we do. But we have people coming in all the time as volunteers running programs for people. And we are allowed for people who have a criminal conviction to come back in, which is totally, obvious to us, and I guess not so obvious yet to some people concerned with safety and security here, but it models for people what's possible. There is life for you. And, unless this keeping the rehabilitative programs to the last part of when you're leaving, and to think of reintegration in such a short, it just doesn't line up in any kind of way with what I know is required for people to really change the trajectory of life that they're on. You don't look satisfied. I didn't answer your question, did I?
You did, but I don't know if there's that much difference to what you're experiencing back at home, to be honest.
In what way?
For people in order to do, say, college. So here, for people to do a college or a university degree, they have to pay for that themselves. So therefore, they have to access a student loan or things like that. So we do also do vocational training, but I agree with you. I'm not sure there's a great alignment to the vocational training that's on offer and the employment opportunities in the future that there are, because we still have very traditional vocational training on offer in our prison system, and those jobs are becoming less and less sort of achievable or maintainable. So I think we also have to look at what we offer in our education service here too.
So one of the things that we do is, besides offering 4-credit college programs, we partner to increase the kind of intellectual life of a prison with a lot of different entities. I mean, we partner with the Tribeca Film Institute that runs like a monthly film event inside and trains some of the long-termers who are going to be there for a long time in how you facilitate discussion groups after a film. Prisons have to be filled with life and people, and at least as far as I, have experienced it, if people are going to be able to conceive of a different possibility for themselves. And by the way, that's how you get the public to understand that people in prison are not that strange, alien, and scary most of the time, and, they can actually want them to be out in the community, Yes.
I'll just stand on the side. I don't actually have a question. I actually wanted to, I actually came here quite sceptical, thinking that what did America know about what how we live here in our justice system. And I was just sitting there with Marion Blake from Platform Charitable Trust, and I was telling her how right you are. And the reason why I say that is because I myself am a mother that was incarcerated, and I've been out 8 years. And in our justice system, like coming from a woman's point of view, I sat here was just like, whoa, that's cool, man. She actually understands. And she's not even from our culture. But what I wanted to say is that how important it was to actually start from the beginning in remand. Because in our system now, we don't have any programs for remand right now. And I did write a program which said that we needed to start from the minute we walked into prisons to start encouraging us and empower us women to be better mothers. You've got to understand we come from a background of violence, like you just said, violence, drugs, and everything else that's wrong, or disconnected within our own culture, or we don't have a sense of belonging or acceptance or abandonment issues, and so on and so on and so on. So I love how you did say that. And then in saying that, when we get to sentence part, there's not enough programs for women. Why? Because there wasn't enough numbers for women to have these programs. So during my time, I was incarcerated. First time I ever was incarcerated was in 2001. I was on remand. I was 19 years old, and there was no programs whatsoever. The only programs I had was running drugs right throughout the wings, sliding them, and that was what because there was nothing else. There was no other programs to do, and this is the reality of it all. Then I came back in 2005. I got arrested again, and I was on remand for a few months. Once again, it was on a local yard. The only thing we had was volleyball at Arohata Women's Prison that we got to do. There's no other programs. Then I got released, and then back in 2006, still I sat there on remand for a whole year. And all we did amongst us women was think of what our next crime was going to be. We couldn't think of anything else. There was nothing to help us or empower us to do anything different, or learn that the violence behaviour that we've come from is not the same. But as we're in there, we're all violent towards one another. If we have a misunderstanding, all we know is to use our fist. And then come sentence, like I said, there wasn't enough programs. There were only 2 programs that I'd done in prison. One was called kōwhiritanga, the other one was the drug treatment program. And once again, it was you had to wait. There was a wait list for so many women, not just only from Wellington region, but from the Auckland and Christchurch region, to get a spot in a bedroom that only held 20 women. And the wait list was long. That was the only drug treatment program that we had during the time I was there. I was released 2011. The reintegration plan that was put in place, it kind of fell apart for me. So there wasn't like you said, you had a year where you got to have a place to go to. The reintegration part for me was I had Salvation Army that came on board because I had nowhere to live. I'd sat in prison for for all those years, had nowhere to live, and they gave me a place to stay. And then that there wasn't long enough. That was only for 3 months. And then after that, you had to find your own place. So you could just imagine someone like myself who's only just learnt a kōwhiritanga program about my crime, and then the drug treatment program, which was a 6-month program, which only just gave me the tools. And this was near the end of my sentence that I got to do this. And then go back into society, and then straight away probation are telling me I need a job. Well, okay. So I went out, tried to find a job, couldn't find a job. Why? Because of my criminal history. And then after that, for a couple of more, it's taken me 8 years to get to where I am today. I don't have a job, but I do have a 24-hour job, and that's being a mother to my 3 little babies. Now, I do have a child that suffered from the decisions I made in the past, and she currently is affected by all that stuff that you had said about her trauma and everything. That she's 15 now, and there wasn't anything there for her and I to have that bond between, to help grow our bond at all. Right now, she's just totally angry because Mum was never there for her. And like you said, I'd love to see something here that where me as mother, or those that are inside now, can bond properly with their children and be able to start that process. I love the photo at the end. But I just wanted to say how amazing that I quite like America now.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think there were so many key outtakes from what you've told us, and you're right, there are many parallels between us, even though we think we're very different. And I loved your use. I will very much try to person-first language. That's really good. And the other things, like I hadn't actually turned my mind to things like collateral consequences and how important and significant they are for people. So I think that's very important. You will be comforted to know that we did have a really good session. I think the Minister was very engaged by meeting Anne. We had a little slot which extended to twice its amount of time. And he did talk about the concept. He was very keen to draw his diagram, which was actually walking alongside right from the start, and the way that we can do that together. And I think that's really, really important. So thank you all for taking the time today. It's been really fabulous, and for the questions that you've answered and the stories that you shared. I would really like to thank KPMG for hosting us and for the tremendous food that was provided. To my own team of Wendy, Holly and John for making this series happen. But to Anne, your huge generosity of spirit, your humbleness and respectfulness, we're actually really in awe of you. So thank you. Let's give her another round. So you'll be able to watch this again. Grant and the team will have this, and we will post it on the PSN website along with Anne's slides. And Anne, she doesn't quite know this yet, but she's going to do another 5-minute key outtakes. We're going to record that shortly. So if you haven't got time to watch it again, or your colleagues, you can watch the key messages. So thank you again, and we'll let you know about our next in the series when we work that up. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.